Bubsy! You cannot tell me that Bubsy isn't an icon. Everyone knows Bubsy. But there's one game in the series that has garnered the most fame, Bubsy 3D. There is one reason, and one reason only, as to why I made this video, and it was to explain why. Why does Bubsy 3D look like this? Why does Bubsy 3D play like this? And why does Bubsy even exist at all? So on this episode of Beta64, we're gonna see everything there is to know about Bubsy 3D. Beta64 is brought to you by its Patreon members, and it's what keeps this channel going strong. As you're probably well aware, YouTube is not exactly the most reliable of platforms. That's why it's more important than ever before to support your favorite creators. And if you're still watching this, I'd wager to say that you enjoy some Beta64. Well, I enjoy making these videos. So if you would like to see this channel carry on for years to come, check out the Beta64 Patreon. Over there, you get new exclusive content every week with years of backlog to binge. From Lost Media watch-alongs to behind-the-scenes videos to cozy Let's Plays and an exclusive podcast. You get more than just warm, fuzzy feelings of supporting your favorite creator. You also get haha funnies and interesting fun facts. Plus, you can get your name etched into the end card of every future Beta64 episode too, so that way you can immortalize your support of the show for all to see. Today's the day to join the Beta64 Patreon, and bonus, if you become an annual member, you'll even save a whopping 20% off. Thank you for considering joining my Patreon, and without further ado, let's get back to the show and learn all about Bubsy 3D.
Before we begin our journey into the development of Bubsy 3D, we need to know about how Bubsy came to be. Who is Bubsy's father? Well, that would be Michael Berlin. Michael is not only the creator of Bubsy, but also had quite a substantial career beforehand, making interactive fiction and adventure games for many years at places like Infocom, Activision, and EA. The problem was that, in a way, he was almost too good at it. Michael became so synonymous with interactive fiction that when he wanted to leave that genre and create something new, he wasn't allowed to. Well, it actually went beyond that. His producer at the time said straight up he could not do it, that he wasn't knowledgeable enough and he should stay in his lane. So what was it that Michael wanted to make? He wanted to make Sonic, or Mario, or really just a character-based platformer. Something that would be, a challenge to make, especially for someone who hadn't made one before, but Michael knew that going in and wanted to try anyway. It seemed like fun. So he went to his producer and asked what he could do to convince him to give him a chance. To which his producer replied, write an entire analysis on Sonic the Hedgehog, find out what about the game makes it so great. And Michael went all in. He was gonna figure it out. He spent an entire week doing nothing but playing through Sonic to write this analysis, and to also get an idea of what he would want to do with his own character, assuming that, he got the chance. He was impressed and overwhelmed by just how big and well-designed Sonic's levels were, taking special note of how cool Sonic looked while he jumped through the air. And that was where the idea for Bubsy's Glide came in. After finishing this quite substantial analysis, he presented it to his producer. Well, what do you think? Michael asked. This is great. I could totally see you doing this. Just not with us. The producer was busy, didn't want to take a chance on this project. So in the end, Michael decided it was time to move on. He left EA and now he was on his own. Just him and his dream. Well, what now? Michael had just left EA and was now on the hunt for a company that would give his dream a chance. And just as luck would have it, he was contacted by Sam Nelson, a producer at Accolade at the time. Sam wanted to ask if Accolade could use a text adventure development system that Michael had created years prior, so that way they could combine it with Steve Cartwright's graphical development system to make a graphic adventure game. The game would be called Less Manly in Search for the King. And after some back and forth, Michael decided he'd do one better and actually join Accolade to help out with the game's development. But just because he was working on a different game didn't mean that his dream of making his own character platformer was over. He wanted to make a character with the potential of becoming its own series. It wasn't just going to be a clone of Sonic. This character was going to have his own personality, and his name would be Bubsy the Bobcat.
What could possibly go wrong? Ouch.
But this video isn't about Bubsy 1, it's about Bubsy 3. D. And I promise we're gonna get to that, but I need to set the record straight real quick. Bubsy was a success in 1993. Accolade had aggressively marketed the character, going as far as to get someone to wear a full Bubsy costume at CES 1993. It was a highly anticipated game, and when Bubsy first released later that year, it got very positive reviews, ranging from 80 to 90%. Sure, a lot of the reviews said that the controls were a bit rough and the momentum practically uncontrollable, but that didn't stop Accolade from considering the game a complete success. So, Bubsy 2, anybody?
Accolade wanted more Bubsy. It was time to capitalize. But how did Michael feel? Well, he was done. Yeah, that was it. He left Accolade. But since he made Bubsy for Accolade, he didn't have the rights to be a part of the continuation of the series. He had to start all over again. But this time, he was not alone. He decided to work with an old friend he knew from Infocom, Mark Blank. Mark is a pretty prolific game developer, being part of the team that made Zork, one of the first commercially successful text-based adventure games. Together, they started their own software development company called Blank, Berlin & Company. During Michael's time away from Bubsy, both he and Mark went on to make software for the Apple Newton, like crossword puzzles, as well as live-action football for Mac and Windows. But even if Michael wasn't there to make another Bubsy, there was going to be another Bubsy. Enter in Bubsy 2, a sequel that was mostly well received, though Michael likes to refer to it as the beginning of the end of Bubsy. Michael didn't think it captured the spirit of Bubsy, and then came Bubsy and the Fractured Furry Tales. That one was a little painful. It had an average review score of around 50 to 60%. It was clear things were starting to take a turn, that Bubsy was in deep trouble. The series hadn't had a hit in years, and its reputation, it was suffering. Accolade could see it. I think everyone could see it. They needed a way to bring Bubsy back from the brink of destruction. And what better person to call than the creator of Bubsy himself, Michael. At this point, though, it was a little late to repair Bubsy's reputation. At least that's what Michael thought. But Accolade was desperate, asking him to think of any way he could think of to resurrect the series. He thought, and came to a conclusion, one that would have drastic consequences to Bubsy forever. He said it needed to be a brand new game made from the ground up entirely in 3D.
Now, when I say that there were consequences to this decision, I'm of course talking with the benefit of hindsight. By all accounts, the decision to go into 3D was a fantastic idea. The PlayStation and 3D gaming was the hot new thing. Michael wanted to save Bubsy, and creating a 3D platformer would be a massive selling point. There was no Crash Bandicoot, there was no Mario 64. At that time, your competition was freaking Bug. Not to mention, Bug also had a high-pitched voice that constantly said one-liners too, but Bug got a 9 out of 10 on Game Informer. So why do people call Bubsy the worst video game of all time? What's Bug got that Bubsy don't? Huh? Sorry, I'm getting worked up over Bug again. Okay, let's continue.
Michael was overjoyed to be working on Bubsy again. But this time he would be working with his team at Blank, Berlin & Company, though they had actually changed their name to Eidetic in hopes that they could expand the company with this new game. Development of Bubsy 3D actually began in April of 1995, starting with a team of around 8 people. Michael was the producer and designed Bubsy 3D alongside Mark Blank. But how do you make a 3D platformer? As I alluded to before, there were only a handful of 3D platformers that had released at the time. There was no tried and true method to make a game like this. Nothing you could look at and say, oh, that's a good idea, write that down, we'll put it in our game. As you could imagine, that made Bubsy 3D's development exceptionally difficult. The team didn't have any pre-made tools for drawing the environment, so they had to make that from scratch. There was no precedent for how the character should be controlled in a 3D platformer, so they had to make that up, which led to many issues getting the game just to be functional. But that didn't mean everything was dark and dreary at the office. There was some fun to be had. For instance, creating the enemies for Bubsy to face. That was a highlight, with everyone pitching in to tweak their designs to create something special. Being creative was a nice break from the mind-numbing technical issues. You get to see a lot of those characters they made in the opening cutscene of the game, and you may have noticed watching Bubsy 3D's cutscenes that something feels strange. It's so unique in its presentation. Well, that's because the cutscenes were first hand-animated in 2D, and after that was finished, 3D models were made to mimic those 2D animations. The entire art style of the game was based on Warner Brothers cartoons. Why? Because Michael and Mark were big fans. There were posters all around the office of Bugs Bunny, and they even got famous Warner Brothers animator Chuck Jones to oversee some of the art direction. But Bubsy 3D's visuals weren't just an artistic choice. The game's unique flat visuals were a consequence of the PlayStation's limitations. But Andrew, you ask, there's lots of other PlayStation games that don't need to be flat. What do you mean limitations? Well, that's because the way Bubsy 3D was made was also a bit unique. The whole game is unique in many ways. Allow me to explain in more detail. For most PlayStation 1 games, 3D scenes were rendered in 240p, and when the game needed to render static scenes like pause menus, the console switched to 480i. Now for Bubsy 3D, the entire game runs at 480i, which means all the 3D scenes in Bubsy 3D are being rendered in the PS1's interlace mode, which, as I said before, is normally only used for rendering 2D images. It's extremely rare to have a fully 3D game run entirely in 480i on the PS1, and it was only possible due to the art direction that they chose to use. So, good news, it runs at the highest resolution possible for the PS1. Bad news, they had to use almost exclusively flat colors. But they didn't just slap it all together with no regard to visuals, they use Gouraud shading, like this. It makes the colors in the game look nice and smooth. The team did the best they could within the limitations of the console. And bonus, doing it this way really made Bubsy stick out from the environment, so they wouldn't have to worry about the player losing track of him on the screen. All said and done, things were looking pretty good for old Bubsy. The game was working, the visuals looked good, it ran at a higher resolution than competitors on the platform. I think it's time to show it off at Winter Consumer Electronics Show in January of 1996. And tragically, that would be the last time that the team would feel confident of Bubsy 3D. The Consumer Electronics Show was a pretty big deal for the gaming industry at the time. It hosted some pretty major reveals, like the Atari VCS in 1997, the NES in 1985, and Bubsy 3D in 1996. The whole point of showing off your game there was to get distributors like Walmart interested in pre-ordering copies of your game to sell at retail. And since it was a big deal, Michael attended the event in person to show off a beta build of Bubsy 3D at Accolade's booth. Everyone was feeling pretty good, the game looked good, everything was good, but not for long. During the show, Michael decided to take a trip to the Nintendo area to see a new Mario game called Super Mario 64.
Now hold on a second. What do you mean he saw Super Mario 64 during CES 1996? That is not possible. Nintendo backed out of the show at the last minute. Well, I'm not saying that's wrong, but Michael said in several interviews that he saw the new 3D Mario game at CES 1996 in Las Vegas, and I don't think he was misremembering anything. No. I think that Mario 64 was shown at the Consumer Electronics Show, just not on the show floor. In an interview with RetroVolve, Michael states that the Nintendo area where he was shown the game wasn't a booth, it was a small office building. And we know from this image that Tim Stamper tweeted that there are physical copies of the Super Mario 64 CES 1996 build. My theory is that Michael got a special viewing of the game in a different building that was invite only. But that's neither here nor there. Somehow he saw Super Mario 64, and once he saw it, it was quite the rude awakening.
Oh God. Oh no. Oh, it's so good. What is that? Analog stick controls? Man, the PlayStation doesn't even have an analog stick. Oh, we are in serious trouble. Michael went back to Accolade's booth and told Mark to check out the game too. And after a bit, Mark came back and it was clear they were screwed. We can't ship this. We can't ship Bubsy 3D like this. That's what Michael told Mark at the show, but they had already been paid by Accolade to make the game, and they did not have the funds to rebuild it from scratch. Not to mention the deadlines were coming up. They were already late into the game's development cycle. Even if they had the money, they didn't have the time. Bubsy 3D was good, but it wasn't good enough. What could they even do at this point? That was the question on everyone's mind as CES 1996 drew to a close and development resumed. When Michael and Mark returned from the show, they informed the rest of the team what happened. They knew they had to make Bubsy 3D far more complex of a game in order to compete with Mario 64. But Accolade was pushing for the product to be finished soon, which Michael felt they had every right to do. They just had to do what they could in the time that they had. And thanks to the brand new release of Bubsy in the Perfect Collection, we can actually see a glimpse of what the game was like during that time in the Meowseum. There we have never before seen footage of a Bubsy 3D press preview that was built late in the game's development. At least I think it's late in development, since the changes here are very minor. So let's take a look. In the first level, the hill that appears right at the beginning was taller in the early version, and when you cross over it via the platforms above, you'll notice that there were some extra ones added into the distance for the final version. Other than that, the only really other noticeable change is that one of the rocket parts was originally right next to the exit before it was later moved over the water to provide more of a challenge. And that's it for the first level. Nothing too big here. But the second level shows us a more substantial change. See, in the final version, the sky is literally one bluish color. But the early press build of the game shows us a beautiful looking background that was cut from the level. But why did they remove it? Well, it's probably because it was super glitchy, with sections of it occasionally popping in and out of existence. That's a pretty good reason to remove it, even if it does look nice most of the time. And that's all the early footage we get to see. After the team put together this build of the game for the press, it was only a matter of time before they'd have to call it quits to make Bubsy 3D's scheduled release date. When the game finally released on November 25th, 1996, the reviews were painful. Michael thought the game did pretty good, but the public was not impressed. Even to this day, the general public is still not impressed. After all that struggle, all of the mind-numbing technical issues and stress, Michael considered leaving the game development industry entirely. Not because of how poorly the game was received, just to reevaluate things. Even though he considered the game to be his biggest failure, he at least took solace in the fact that 3D platformers were so incredibly new at the time that developing Bubsy 3D really was just a stab in the dark. And in the end, it was pretty good, all things considered. Had the game released a year earlier before Crash Bandicoot and Mario 64, things may have fared differently. But that's, just how it goes sometimes. Technology was moving so fast at the time. It was tough for many developers to keep up. And in the gaming industry, you don't always get the chance to try again. The team behind Bubsy 3D really did give it all they had. And maybe because of that, there's barely anything unused in the game. There's this unused cutscene that shows Bubsy falling to his doom into wooden planks, something that can't happen in the final game since there's no fall damage. But yeah, that's basically it. Now, there is a prototype of the Bubsy 3D European version, which was released in 1997, but it's still fundamentally the same game. The biggest difference between the European version and the North American version is that they removed memory card saving from the game, instead opting to only use a password system. But perhaps that wasn't always the case, since this prototype of the European version still has the memory card saving feature intact. The final version released in Europe does have an exclusive, unused Cartwright screen that shows off a planned Japanese version of the game that didn't end up getting made. It seems that any attempt to continue porting Bubsy 3D ended by 1997, which is sad because there were plans to release a Sega Saturn port of the game. It would have been great. It could have used the Saturn's 3D analog stick controllers so you wouldn't have to stop, turn, move forward, stop, turn. It would have been sick to be able to run around the world without tank controls, but it wasn't meant to be. It was going to release in spring of 1997 according to the official website, but that obviously did not happen. Even after all this, after all the poorly received games, all the technical issues, the cancel ports, believe it or not, Accolade still wanted to make Bubsy 4, even going as far as to request Michael to pitch them a new game. But Michael was done. He didn't want to continue making Bubsy games, and neither he nor Accolade ever worked on the series again.
Of course, many years later, we did technically get new Bubsy games. We got Woolly Strike Back and Paws on Fire, but they are just not the same. Who would have guessed that my two favorite Bubsy games would just so happen to be the only two that Michael was involved in the development of? Yeah, I said it. I like Bubsy 3D. I think the art style is charming. I played a lot of tank control games as a kid, so that doesn't bother me. It's got heart, and I like it. So, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and give it the Gold Beta Award. I don't give that out to just anyone. You earned it, Bubsy.
Well, would you look at all these lovely producers from Patreon? If you want to join them, you gotta check out the Beta64 Patreon. The link is on the screen, in the description, and the pinned comment as well. You can't miss it. You get new exclusive content every week, including a behind the scenes of the video you just finished watching. Thank you so much for your consideration and your support. Bye.